there's a prisoner of war camp outside of what is today Americus, Georgia. It was called Camp Sumter, and it was located outside of the little tiny town of Andersonville, Georgia. I think it was in Macon County for the most part. Well, for more than a year before the end of the Civil War, or the War between the States, as some Southerners still call it, this prisoner of war camp held up to 45,000 Union prisoners, 13,000 of whom died during their incarceration due to scurvy, diphtheria, no, not diphtheria, what was it? Diarrhea, typhoid, and dysentery. Unfortunately, it was documented that many of the Union soldiers, as they were ushered into the stockade, asked the same question: is this hell? During this last year of the Civil War, there was very little food for the Confederate soldiers, or for the civilian population for that matter, which meant that there was even less for the captured Union soldiers, and the only water source that they had was a swamp in the middle of the stockade called Stockade Creek. All the men drank from this creek and used it as toilets. But then came there's a folk legend of the lightning strike. I remember being taken to Andersonville as a small child, by 10 or 11 anyway, by my Aunt Betty Jane Ross. My brothers and I were taken there so that we could understand how bad it had been for these prisoners. The story goes that one night during a particularly bad and harsh and hot time, a large collection of the prisoners gathered during this storm and prayed to God for deliverance from their situation. But instead of deliverance, a lightning bolt struck the ground near the group. A little while later, some of the men noticed that the ground around the strike was not just hot, it was wet. So they grabbed their spoons and anything else that they could dig with, including their hands, and started digging at the wet spot. A spring erupted right there at that lightning strike with pure water that saved many of the men, and that spring still flows today and is marked at the site. Every bit of this, where the white posts are, is where they incarcerated 45,000 Union soldiers. 45,000. The Providence Spring, where most of the water came from, was damaged in the hurricane, Hurricane Michael, so they're having to reconstruct it or fix it because the front marble is not damaged. But these are monuments sent and installed by the various states where the Union soldiers who died here were from. Apparently they didn't, if a soldier didn't die here, the state didn't send a monument. But 13,000 of that 45,000 died here from cholera, malaria, starvation, dying of thirst. recreation of what the stockade looked like with the men's tents. All they got was a piece of canvas or a blanket or whatever they could steal from each other. Put it up over pieces of wood that probably didn't exist after very long. And that was the only thing that sheltered them from the elements, including the brutal heat in South Georgia. There's nothing worse than 95 and 100-degree heat when you're in a dark blue uniform. Whatever trees there had been at that time are long gone, except for that one. That one's over, well, it's probably 100 years old. So I'm thinking all the trees that were here at that time are no longer here. I can hear the train from here, which means that's the train that they marched, put the men on, put the prisoners on, and then marched them from the train station to here. Sounds like it's about 10 miles away. And that's the worst enemy I can imagine those soldiers having. Fire ants. These are the honored dead who died here at Andersonville, who were from the tiny little state of Rhode Island. It says, known dead, 378 from the state of Wisconsin. To live in hearts that we leave behind is not to die. 12,920 Union soldiers were buried in this cemetery. And now it's open to the public. If you're a veteran, you and your immediate family can be buried in this cemetery. This is a different section, much further down the road, that they're reserved for current day veterans.